Jake Thompson was a man of few words, but his presence spoke volumes. Living in a large, secluded ranch on the outskirts of a small town, Jake's life was defined by hard work and a deep connection to the land. He wasn't just any cowboy, he was a successful one. The ranch, passed down from his father, was thriving, and Jake was known far and wide as the man to approach if you wanted to buy cattle or find a reliable rancher. But despite his wealth and good looks, there was one thing Jake had no interest in: women. It wasn't that Jake didn't appreciate the beauty of a woman. It was just that he had learned long ago that love wasn't worth the heartache. His heart had once belonged to a woman named Clara. She was the love of his life, and for a time Jake believed they would grow old together. But Clara had left him, and with her, she took the dream of a future he had once cherished. She had left him for a man with more money, more power, and more influence. The pain of that rejection cut deep, and since that day Jake had sworn off love for good. He didn't need the distraction, he thought. There was too much work to be done, and too many memories of betrayal that he would rather forget. Jake's friends and neighbors often questioned his decision. The town was full of beautiful women, and many of them were curious about him. They would flirt, drop hints, or even outright ask him out. But Jake never showed the slightest interest. He would politely decline, often with a gentle smile that hid the deep scars of his past. His friends would try to set him up on dates, but Jake always had an excuse. He was too busy with work. Or he'd just say he wasn't interested. There were no exceptions. As far as Jake was concerned, love was a chapter of his life he had closed and never intended to reopen. The other men in town didn't understand. They'd joke about Jake's choices, calling him the lone cowboy. But there was more truth to it than anyone knew. Jake's life was quieter without the complications of romance. The ranch kept him busy, and he had grown used to the solitude. He had his horses, his cattle, and the peace of his wide-open land. It was all he needed, or so he thought. Then one afternoon, a woman named Emma arrived at his ranch. She was new to town, having just inherited a small piece of land on the edge of the town. Unlike the other women who had tried to get Jake's attention with their beauty, Emma wasn't concerned with that at all. She wasn't there to chase him, impress him, or flatter him. She had a business proposal to offer, and she wasn't afraid to make it. Emma had heard about Jake from a few people in town and knew that he was one of the best ranchers around. She had inherited a piece of land near his ranch and was looking for ways to make it profitable. Her idea was simple: a partnership. She suggested they join forces, combining their resources to trade cattle and expand their operations. It was a smart idea, one that could benefit them both. But when Emma knocked on the door of Jake's ranch to present her proposal, she found herself facing a man who was far from welcoming. Jake was busy that day, but he had time to listen to a business offer. He was polite but distant. His eyes, usually sharp and intense, gave nothing away. Emma, on the other hand, was not intimidated. She introduced herself calmly and explained her plan. She was straightforward and confident, and for the first time in a long while, Jake found himself actually listening. She wasn't trying to win him over with compliments or charm, like the other women who had come before. She simply wanted to do business. As Emma spoke, Jake couldn't help but notice how different she was from the others. She didn't fawn over him. She didn't comment on his appearance or his wealth. Instead, she spoke about the land, the cattle, and the practicalities of their partnership. She made eye contact with him, holding her own in the conversation. There was no pretense, just a woman who knew what she wanted and wasn't afraid to ask for it. Jake, though intrigued, was skeptical. He had been burned before, and trust didn't come easily to him. He had always kept his distance from people, and now more than ever, he had no interest in making new friends or new business partners. But Emma's persistence began to chip away at his walls. She didn't seem like someone who would back down easily, and something about her attitude, her calm determination, stirred something in him that he hadn't felt in years. He was still hesitant, but he found himself agreeing to think about her proposal. He told her he would need some time to consider it and invited her to come back the following week. When she left that day, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Emma wasn't like the other women he had known. He had spent so many years shutting people out, but Emma wasn't asking for anything more than a business arrangement. Yet as he went about his daily routine, Jake realized he was curious about her. There was something about her that felt genuine. The following days passed slowly, but Emma's visit lingered in Jake's thoughts. He kept himself busy, as usual, but her words kept echoing in his mind. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to being intrigued by someone, especially not someone who wasn't interested in winning his heart. He found himself wondering why she was so different, why he felt drawn to her, when he had never felt such a connection with anyone before. Still, Jake remained guarded. He knew that getting too close to anyone could lead to disappointment, just as it had before. But the more he thought about Emma, the more he realized that she wasn't like the women he had rejected. She wasn't asking him for anything, and that made her stand out in a way no one else ever had. The days passed, and eventually Emma returned, just as Jake had asked. This time their conversation was a little more relaxed. Jake still kept his distance, but there was a shift. He was listening, really listening to what she had to say. And for the first time in years, Jake felt a small spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The first part of Jake and Emma's story sets the stage for a connection neither expected. Jake's rejection of love and relationships is rooted in past pain, but Emma's visit begins to stir something deep within him, a longing he thought he'd buried forever. As Emma's persistence challenges his old beliefs, Jake finds himself questioning everything he thought he knew about love and trust. Over the next few days, Jake found himself thinking about Emma more than he cared to admit. His usual routine on the ranch was as demanding as ever, with feeding the cattle, maintaining the property, and overseeing the workers. But despite the work, his mind often wandered back to their conversation. Emma had presented her ideas so calmly, without any of the flattery or hidden agendas that Jake had come to expect from women. She was straightforward, and there was something refreshing about her honesty. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't just a wealthy rancher to her. He was a person. It was a feeling he hadn't realized he had been missing. Emma, for her part, didn't try to push Jake into anything. She understood that he was wary, but she wasn't bothered by his hesitation. She had always believed in letting things unfold naturally, and this partnership was no different. She respected his space, knowing that he needed time to come to terms with the idea of working together, but she also knew that their skills and resources could make a strong business venture. Every time she returned to the ranch, Jake seemed a little more open, a little less distant. It was subtle, but it was progress. One evening, after a long day of work, Jake invited Emma to stay for dinner. It wasn't something he normally did. He had always kept his personal life separate from his business, but there was something about Emma's presence that made him feel at ease. She wasn't interested in his wealth or status. She simply wanted to work, and that honesty resonated with him. As they sat down at the kitchen table, the conversation flowed easily. They talked about the weather, about the ranching business, and even about their childhoods. Jake shared stories of growing up on the ranch, of working alongside his father, and how he had always been determined to keep the ranch running smoothly. Emma, in turn, told him about her life before moving to the area. She had grown up in a small town, where she had learned the value of hard work and independence. She had inherited the property from an aunt who had passed away, and though it wasn't much compared to Jake's land, Emma was determined to make it work. There was something about Emma's stories that made Jake smile. She spoke with such confidence and warmth, and it made him feel comfortable in a way he hadn't felt in years. He realized that despite their differences, they shared similar values. They both believed in hard work, in earning what you had, and in taking care of the land. As the night went on, they moved outside to the porch, where the stars sparkled above them in the clear night sky. The air was cool and the sounds of the ranch surrounded them. Emma leaned back in her chair, enjoying the silence. It was a peaceful moment, and Jake found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in a long time. "Jake," Emma said, breaking the silence, "I know you've been through a lot. I can tell there's something that's holding you back from really trusting anyone. But I want you to know, I'm not here to change your life or ask for anything from you. I just want to see if we can build something together." Jake looked at her, his blue eyes softening. He had been so focused on keeping people at a distance that he hadn't realized how much he had been shutting out. Emma's words hit him harder than he expected. She wasn't asking for anything in return. She simply wanted to help, to build something together, and to do it with honesty and respect. It was a refreshing change from the games and false promises he had experienced before. "You don't have to convince me," Jake said quietly. "I'm just not sure how to let anyone in anymore." Emma nodded. I understand. But I think sometimes letting someone in isn't about forgetting the past. It's about moving forward with it. We can learn from our mistakes, but they don't have to define us. Jake was quiet for a moment. He had always carried the weight of his past with him, like a heavy coat that he couldn't take off. He had loved Clara deeply, and the way she had left him had scarred him in ways he hadn't fully understood until now. Emma's words, though, made him think. Maybe it wasn't about forgetting. Maybe it was about accepting what had happened and finding a way to live beyond it. The night grew late, and Emma eventually stood up, preparing to leave. I'll see you tomorrow, Jake, she said with a smile. Yeah, Jake replied. Tomorrow. As she walked away, Jake stood there for a few moments, staring up at the stars. He felt a shift within himself. He wasn't sure what it meant, but he knew he couldn't ignore the feelings that were beginning to surface. For the first time in a long while, he was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, it was worth opening his heart again. The next day, Emma returned to the ranch, and Jake was already there waiting for her. He had spent the night thinking about everything she had said, and when she arrived, he didn't hesitate. Let's talk about that partnership, he said. I think it could work. I think we could make it work. Emma's face lit up. She hadn't expected such a quick change, but she was thrilled. This was more than just a business deal. It was a sign that Jake was starting to trust her, that he was willing to give their connection a chance. Over the next few weeks, they worked together closely, planning their business, setting goals, and tackling challenges. The more they worked together, the more they found themselves learning from each other, both professionally and personally. Emma's persistence had paid off. She hadn't pushed Jake into anything. She had simply been herself, honest, hardworking, and patient. And in return, Jake was beginning to see that maybe love didn't have to come with the heavy baggage of the past. Maybe with time, trust could be rebuilt, and a new kind of relationship could grow. One evening, after a long day of planning, Jake invited Emma to stay for dinner again. This time, there was no hesitation in his voice when he spoke. He wanted her there, not just for the partnership, but for the friendship they had built. As they sat down at the table, he realized that he had started to care for Emma in a way he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about two people who had found something real, something worth holding on to. As the evening went on, they talked more about their plans for the future, both on the ranch and in their lives. And for the first time in a long time, Jake felt hopeful about the future, not because of his wealth or success, but because he had found someone who truly understood him. Emma had slowly but surely broken down the walls he had built around his heart. And now, Jake was ready to see where their connection could lead.